Okay, this video is why am I so confident on nutrition? Because people say to me, oh, well, so-and-so, some famous person recommends something. Most experts recommend soy or some other BS. Why don't I recommend it? And I'm going to tell you, it's because I know the truth. I've gone back and read tons and tons of the old papers, the epidemiology papers. And this modern stuff's all a bunch of BS. None of these old healthy populations were eating nuts and seeds and omega-3 supplements or olive oil and coffee, tea, and flax. There were some nuts in the Seventh-day Adventists, but they totally exaggerated, and big money has gotten in there to promote nuts. So that's not reliable information anymore. Then some people say, well, the Asians ate a lot of soy. No, they didn't. They ate a little bit of soy that was minimal, unprocessed, from their backyard. Okay, they weren't eating that much soy. Artificial intelligence, people tell me, oh, well, it's, so incredible, its ability to go through the research. Artificial intelligence is a joke, okay? It has no judgment. It cannot tell reality from nonsense, and it seeks consensus, official certification. It's going to recommend the Mediterranean diet and high-fat phony nonsense, okay? It's not a coincidence that none of the popular commercial channels will interview me, because I'm not going to sell their BS, okay? And that's also why I say you need Christian ethics or else everything goes to shit, because money takes over. I don't give a rat's ass. They're going to Jenna, what side, all the Christians anyway, so I might as well go down telling the truth. Like St. Augustine said, right is right even if no one is doing it. Wrong is wrong even if everyone is doing it. Okay, Walter Kempner. What did he feed his patients? White rice, fruits, and a multivitamin. 3% fat. Look at that. 3% of calories from fat. 4% of calories from protein, approximately. And he cured diabetes, hypertension, obesity, coronary artery disease, congestive heart failure, autoimmune disease, and pretty much almost anything that came his way. And many kidney failure patients, some of the kidney failure patients, of course, were too far gone. Some of the hypertension patients were too far gone. But he cured a lot of them, and none of them would have been cured otherwise. He was reversing hypertensive retinopathy, diabetic retinopathy. That's extraordinary, okay? All these EKGs reverting to normal. Nathan Pritikin reviewed the literature on protein and fat, and he noticed that there were patients in studies doing very well eating less than 1% of calories from fat. I tell you that because there's a lot of BS out there, people out there telling you, oh, you need all this fat. That's not true, okay? Also, they had resuscitation of starving people, and they did great on 2.5% of calories from protein. So, we really don't need hardly any protein. All the arguments about human breast milk only having 5 to 6% of calories from protein. So this idea that we need, large amounts of protein, it's all nonsense, okay? And there's a whole bunch of reasons why high amounts of protein are bad. More stress on the kidneys, more activation of mTOR, acceleration of aging, especially animal protein, increased risk of cancer, etc. And I even told you that I'm not that big a believer in that plant protein is totally safe either, because you don't just eat one plant and get a monosource deficient in some essential amino acid. You eat multiple plant sources of protein, and then you fix those essential amino acid deficiencies, and now you're eating something closer to being like animal protein. That's why I think high protein is bad. Okay, look at Ruth Eidrich. She avoids beans because she wants to lower her protein level. Okay, Nathan Pritikin, his own diet was about 80-10-10. He's the one who figured out that concept of 80% of calories from carbohydrate, 10% from protein, 10% from fat. And his patients did extraordinarily well, almost in the ballpark of as well as Kempner patients did. Caldwell Esselstyn, what did he do? He put his patients on a 100% vegan diet with no oil, and it ended up being close to 80-10-10, probably a little lower than the 10% in fat. Dr. McDougall, his patients did fantastic, cured more patients than any doctor who ever lived. His patients were eating in the ballpark of 83% of calories from carbohydrate, 7% from fat, and about 10% from protein. Okay, so we already know what gets people better. Epidemiology confirms the same thing. Look at the Yanomamo versus the Pima. Look at the Simani with, the clean coronary arteries on CT. In the old days, the mummies ate lots of meats, the pharaohs and stuff, and they got coronary artery atherosclerosis and calcified aortas from atherosclerosis. The Kenya population, 1929, Donison, 1,800 consecutive plant-eating Kenyan men, zero hypertension, whereas the blacks in the modern world in the USA eating processed food and animal foods and tap water, they got hypertension off the charts. Okay, Uganda with Dr. Burkitt, they did an autopsy study on these one huge number of patients with virtually next to nothing in coronary artery disease, and all the differences between Western eating populations versus plant eating populations in Africa and abdominal pressure syndrome and all that. Why you need all that fiber. Papua New Guinea eating 93% of their calories from sweet potatoes, which only has 1% of calories from fat, 4.5% of calories from protein. They're muscular, strong, and energetic. They smoke like chimneys, but they had 6.1 times less lung cancer than USA patients who were smokers. So what I'm trying to say is lung cancer ain't just smoking. It's also the amount of fat in the diet, because the fat causing rouleau formation, blood sludge, contributes to hypoxia, and it's the hypoxia injuring the mitochondria, leading to the Warburg effect, mitochondrial injury with the cancer cell, thus then reverting to becoming like an anaerobic bacteria running more primarily on anaerobic glycolysis. There's a switch over metabolism to hypoxia type of metabolism, which I think actually comes from our ancestral adaptation to infection being the main cause of tissue hypoxia, but it now happens due to high-fat diets and cigarette smoking. Okay, Asians, show me a white rice eater and I'll show you a skinny one. I lived in California for 4 years when I went to college at Stanford, and I just saw tons of skinny rice-eating Asians, and I had some Asian friends, and they were eating rice 3 times a day, white rice. They're all real skinny and healthy. Actually, one of the guys I knew, he's a real muscular wrestler who ate that way. Okay, migration studies. The more you eat fat and animal foods, the fatter and sicker you get. The Nauru population that sold their topsoil like a bunch of chumps for had processed food shipped into their little island by Australia. They're the fattest people in the world. Okay, and the worst foods are like the oils and the highly processed foods. Then I would say the animal foods, if they're and of course there's always a question of an animal food comes from a CAFO, concentrated animal feeding organization. It's going to be significantly worse than something that's grass-fed and a little bit more wild, if you will. But they're still all bad for health foods, okay? I don't want the animal foods to go extinct because they're a backup food supply, but they're not a health food, okay? The good foods, are the organic starches, fruits, and vegetables. And you can even take a plant food and you spray it with glyphosate. It's not a healthy food anymore. You spray it with atrazine. I wouldn't eat atrazine-sprayed corn, non-organic corn, or atrazine-sprayed or glyphosate-sprayed beans. I would only eat organic ones. Anyways, those are the best foods. It's not rocket science. You don't need to be a genius to know this. And because the reason I'm kind of going through this video is I get all these comments like, oh, you're full of BS because you don't recommend soy. I made videos about what a joke soy is. I made videos about what a joke flax is, okay? How you don't need omega-3s. Old people don't need more protein. This is all nonsense, just trying to sell you stuff. Whenever somebody's trying to sell you stuff, they first of all got to convince you have a deficiency. And then they say, now buy my solution, okay? And then you also say to yourself, well, why are all these other doctors so famous and have so many views on their YouTube channel? I have hardly any. Because I tell the truth, okay? I don't really give a shit. I just do this as a hobby. I'm the best doctor in the world because I know a lot and I tell the truth. And most of the other famous ones are selling you BS, okay? And that's why I'm never invited on the popular channels, okay? Well, so be it. You got to make a choice in life. It's nice to be popular, but it's also nice to be good and to tell the truth. And I'm going to go with that approach. I don't have to sell out. I don't do this for money. Okay, let's see, what else? Most of the modern stuff you're going to see, it's poison. So one last comment on Europe versus United States. I've talked to lots of people who have vacationed in Europe, and they say all they see is all these skinny people. They look so much healthier than Americans. And there's a lot of chemicals that's in the American processed food that are not allowed in Europe, so they've stayed skinnier. Plus, people who've gone to Europe have told me they'll look at a food that's the same as an American food, and the American food will have like 10, 15 ingredients, but the European food will only have, 3 or 4 ingredients. So there's more processing of the American foods. And also, like when I read the Estrogen Generation book by Dr. Anthony J., he was talking about how a lot of the bad, harsh estrogenic chemicals are not allowed in Europe, but they're allowed in USA. Anyways, most modern stuff you hear about, it's poisons, okay? A lot of non-specific poisons. The cyanide in flax, cyanocobalamin, vitamin B12 version, almonds, possibly an apeel with some of the allowable contaminants. I wouldn't need any of this stuff because I tell you, oh, it's only such a small amount, it doesn't matter. You know what? I don't want any cyanide. What if it's causing low-grade mitochondrial damage that's not going to manifest until many years later? I don't want it because one of the main causes of aging is damage to mitochondria. That ain't going to help your mitochondria, throwing on a powerful mitochondrial inhibitor, even if it's in small amounts. I don't want it. Okay, what about all the poisons that lower IQ? Fluoride in the water. That lowers IQ, okay? It goes into the brain. Why do you think it's on all the psych meds like Prozac? What's the name of Prozac? The real name is fluoxetine, as in fluoride, okay? Why do fluoroquinolones penetrate the brain better? Because of fluoride, okay? it's damaging to your brain. It's a mitochondria inhibitor. It's a neurotoxin. It forms complexes with aluminum. Gee, maybe that's why it's in the tap water, okay? Facilitating traversal of membrane barriers, making it less polar, binds tightly like it'll replace a hydrogen. Okay, that's toxic crap. Those are brain poisons. That's why you should always filter your water. Okay, hexane, because that's also why people say, oh, you should drink 8 cups of water a day. You'll notice that people who say that, they usually don't specify you should be drinking, reverse osmosis water, and then you're going to have to squeeze something into it because it's going to be too hypoosmolar to drink that much of it, or eat first. The hexane contaminations on soy, the glyphosate contamination on soy, the herbicide, aspartame sweetener, all those sweeteners are toxic. Stevia, stay away from all of them. Erythritol, I wouldn't eat any of them. They're all poisons. Okay, atrazine's a mitochondria inhibitor. That's potentially going to cause brain damage if you're inhibiting your brain. Mitochondria, and it's also, we talked about it, it's also a super powerful feminizing chemical, turns the male frog into female frogs, and A pill possibly has neurotoxic contaminants in it. Poisons to feminize men. There's a huge push to feminize men. This is not by accident. This is on purpose. Like I said, when I was in high school, I went to a giant high school. I never heard of a single person who was a lesbian or a homosexual. Nowadays, 20% of young people say they're one of those LGBTQ things, okay? This was a manufactured thing. Yes, in my high school, there probably were a few who just kept it a secret, but it was rare. It was rare everywhere. You didn't see it on TV. You didn't see it in the school. It just all of a sudden started happening after the year 2000, approximately, okay? And I believe a part of that is they've put so much of this stuff in the water and the food that young people are become a little confused about their gender when you constantly are piling up. Aluminum is a metalloestrogen. They put that in deodorants. That's a big part of why the incidence of breast cancer is going up, especially in the upper outer quadrant, because of the shared lymphatics with the armpit, okay? And the preservatives, parabenzoic acids. There's lots of estrogenic preservatives in almost all personal care products. That's why you want to be a minimalist on that stuff. And so a person gets exposed to all these estrogenic chemicals, fluoride, damaging the testicles, aluminum, metalloestrogen, soy, it can cause premature puberty, okay? That's been known for a long time. Nowadays, the corporations, it's $1 billion product. They buy the journal, buy the scientists, and produce all this stuff saying it's not estrogenic. Yeah, and a lot of those papers will be written by the head of the Soy Institute. I thought that was funny, okay? And a lot of these famous people, they're lazy, okay? Christy Funk quoted a paper saying, soy is not estrogenic. It's like written by the head of the Soy Institute. Don't make me laugh, Go back and read the old papers about children getting premature puberty and other problems about deformities of the reproductive tract. Okay, atrazine, we talked about that. Phthalates and BPA, they're a fucking disaster. BPA, it's a mitochondria inhibitor, and it's also a major feminizer. And then, Gil Solani reviewed all these estrogenic chemicals, and he found that 80% of them were toxic to the brain, potentially lowering IQ, and another 20% were toxic to the thyroid, goitrogenic. So these are all... The public is being poisoned, and they're just too stupid to realize it. So anyways, that's why I'm so confident, because I've done my study. I've done my reading. I know the truth. Low fat, low sodium, 100% organic, no oil, whole foods, intact foods, single ingredient only, because they can add stuff to the second ingredient. That's the best odds you can give yourself to be healthy. So anyways, that's where it's at. Hope that's helpful.